I think we all
Yeah,
know that
I
now.
noticed I've never gotten the verbal cue. That's a first. They're integrating Siri with Zoom now.
Yeah.
Looking back to it.
Siri Zoom.
So yeah, I think we can. I think we can start into it. We're 6 minutes past. I think that's a good time. Some other folks may be trickling in, and so I want to welcome everyone to the Teaching for Equity Sangha series. This is the what we'll actually kind of launch into a little bit first. But what I will say, what's exciting for me here is that this is the first Sangha that Synergy's done in several months. We used to have them really regularly, and we've been busy with other things, so we haven't done any. So I'm really excited to have this one be the first Sangha we've done for quite a while. I think Francisco and myself will have a chance to talk a little in a few, but we're gonna actually start this off with Christina Graf. She's the director of Yoga Alliance Foundation. And I think she'll just give us a little framing and a few words about Yoga Alliance Foundation's involvement in this project. So welcome, Christina.
Thank you so much, Salim. Thank you, Francisco, and thanks to the Teaching for Equity teachers who are here today. I'm so grateful to be at this event with you, and I'll very quickly share who am I, what do we do, why are we here, and then we'll sit back and enjoy the conversation. Again, my name is Christina Graf. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm managing director of the Yoga Alliance Foundation, which is the charitable giving arm of the Yoga Alliance. And what we do at the foundation is we work to leverage yoga for social impact and to foster an expansive, accessible, and equitable yoga community. In sort of everyday terms, what I always explain that means is we're really interested in all the ways that yoga is used to make people's lives better, to support communities, to support greater health and wellness and well-being for all. And we're also really interested in expanding the sphere of people who have access to practice yoga and also who feel welcome, safe, and supported in yoga spaces. So part of it is, can more people access yoga? And another is, when they're accessing it, are the conditions set up so that it is welcoming to all? That's what we're about at the foundation. And the way that we like to work is to partner with and amplify the work of others who are at the front lines of this and have been for a long time. So we've been grateful to have Synergy Yoga as an implementing partner on this program, supporting different and important aspects of the Teaching for Equity work. And then I'll just briefly share, why did the Teaching for Equity program come about? This is the brainchild of my colleague, Maya Breuer, the Vice President of Cross-Cultural Advancement at Yoga Alliance. And we had conversations in the sort of immediately post the beginning of the pandemic phase. Now I'd say we're like squarely in the middle of pandemic phase. But a few months into this experience where a lot of yoga teachers suddenly did not have as much work or any work, we heard about yoga professionals who had experienced teaching in communities that might have had less access to yoga, and that many of them were teaching for free because yoga offered such a critical and important resource to communities in times of crisis and always. We wanted to support yoga teachers working. Their work has a value, and we think the service of teaching for free is awesome, but also they should be paid. And we recognize that in a time of a health and economic crisis, a lot of communities didn't have the means to pay, or there were just other barriers that were preventing this from being possible. So we said, why don't we identify a small pool of teachers who have experience in this area, teaching in communities that have less access to the practice or have been made to feel excluded in some way from traditional or commercial yoga spaces, and pay for the teachers to offer just 10 class sessions, hopefully as seed funding and support for ongoing work. We partnered with Synergy on offering other supports to the teachers, like workshops on marketing and fundraising and financial sustainability of their work, in the hopes of keeping this going. And so now here we are, we finished the pilot round of the Teaching for Equity program. The first 25 teachers have completed their teaching. We stand in awe and gratitude of their work, and I'm so grateful to Synergy for hosting this Sangha series where some of them can share their stories today. So hopefully that hits the main points. And Salim, Francisco, did I leave anything out that you'd want to know?
You're so clear and thorough.
Yeah.
And concise. How do I follow that?
Thanks.
Yeah,
Practice. Thank you so much to both of you. I'm going to mute now.
Yeah, thank you, Christina, and jump in whenever you want. We want to give you guys a little synopsis of Synergy Yoga, and Salim, please chime in. Synergy Yoga, it's we started 2006, and the intention is to cultivate a healing, supportive, thriving, open-minded community through the healing arts. That's a synopsis of our work. We're a global organization with centers in more like Salim, we're co-directors, and he's in Kenya, and I'm currently in Oregon, but I'm moving to Peru at the end of August. So we started a Sangha series when the pandemic begun. We were like, we have to do something. A lot of people are at home, and especially, speaking for the city of Lima, 10 million people, everyone in their little tiny apartment. Let's bring wellness into people's homes. So we started to hold space and highlight positive stories that were able to contribute to people's health and positivity. We have a circle of elders, and these are elders which Maya is who Christina referenced earlier. She's one of the 6 members of the circle of elders. And we started these dialogues, these Synergy Sangha series, and we started doing yoga, and all these different programs, meditation on Zoom. That, obviously the word Zoom, a lot of us here now had no idea what even Zoom was back then. But we started this back then, and we're excited to keep it flowing. Some positive things have taken place, obviously a lot of, nebulous, kind of obscure, just challenges happening in the world today. So we're trying to highlight the positive, and we're very excited to be hosting our 3 presenters today who have been doing this positive before the pandemic begun, and are going to be continued to do it. So that's a little brief on Synergy. Salim, do you want to add anything, my brother?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'll talk a little bit more about what the structure of this Sangha will be. And again, thank you all so much for being here. I'm really, the one thing that I'll add is that I'm really feel honored and excited to be doing this work and be doing it with Yoga Alliance. They've been amazingly supportive, both of Synergy and this particular program, and identifying the need for this type of work. So to me, that's really a huge step. And I feel like the work that Synergy is doing in conjunction with Yoga Alliance has really amplified what we're about, and the work that that we're able to do. And just the fact that we're all here kind of speaking together and sharing the space, to me, is really amazing. So I'm really happy to be in this conversation. So in terms of the structure, we're going to have we have 3 presenters today, and they'll introduce themselves. So I'll allow them to do that. They're going to speak for several minutes each and just give you, they'll talk a bit about their personal description and background in yoga, an overview of the work that was carried out through the Teaching for Equity program. And then if they want to talk a bit about a description of how the work's been affected by the pandemic, the challenges, solidarity that's emerged, the resiliency that's come up, that's been an important word for all of us throughout the pandemic, then those are the type of things that they can touch on. But we want them really to kind of their own voice to come forward. So they'll share what they want to share at the end of the day. What we'd like any of the participants or listeners to do is to jot down any questions, thoughts, feedback, ideas in the chat, which will then have a window of time, several minutes after each presentation, that Francisco and myself will pose to the presenter. Okay, so we'll do 3 rounds like that, and then we'll have time for more of an open discourse at the end, where people will be welcome to either raise your hand or use the raise hand function if you like, and we can call on you so that you can, that the participants can engage with the panelists. Okay, so I think we can roll into it. Yeah, Francisco, anything I missed?
Yeah, and I think the panelists are also going to be sharing some imagery of their work. You know, we're a very visual culture, so it's nice to see some of the pictures and of some of the great, wonderful work they're doing. So we'll make you guys co-host when that comes about.
Yep, the screen is shared, or the screen share option is open. So I think we'll roll right into it. I am excited to introduce Adam Wetterhan. I hope I'm saying your name properly. We pronounce hard T's in Kenya.
Yeah,
in America, so maybe Wetterin. I don't know.
It's Wetterhan. Very close. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Francisco and Salim. It's been great getting to know you this week. And thanks to Christina and the Yoga Alliance and Yoga Alliance Foundation for the Teaching for Equity program. Just really honored to be here today. Yeah, so my name's Adam Wetterhan. My journey with yoga is that I found yoga in a time of my life when my mental, physical, and spiritual health was not so great. And a college professor of mine in theology, actually, a former Trappist monk, invited me to an Ashtanga class at 6 a.m. And I was like, I don't even know what 6 a.m. looks like, but I will drag myself there because I need something. And I hated it at first. I thought it was really awkward and I didn't feel good in my body. But after about 6 months of practice, everything in my life changed. My body, my spirit, my breath, my relationships, big changes. And leaving college, I had in my degree in philosophy and religion, my mentors had encouraged me that any practice that is worthwhile doesn't belong in academia or kind of boutique learning spaces, right? And I myself was not financially able to afford going to a yoga studio, so I was just practicing at home from what I knew. And this opportunity came up to start teaching world philosophy and critical thinking in prison as a volunteer. And so about 9 years ago, I started just as a volunteer teaching inside. And I talked sometimes about my yoga practice and found in the medium security prison where I was teaching that there was incredible interest in the asana practice. So I partnered with a local studio, started seeking formal training, first 200 and then eventually the 500-hour certification, and started bringing in instructors even before I was trained. And so our kind of reading group transformed into a practice group. And so it went from kind of reading Buddhist texts and the Yoga Sutra to actually doing pranayama together, getting some mats donated and starting to do some asana. And so I'd like to show you some photos of this group that we've built and talk a little bit about how Teaching for Equity has helped bring this program to its completion or to the place where it's at now. And also just give you a little indication of what our work is like. So 1 second. Okay, can you all see a giant photo on the screen?
We can
Great.
see, yep.
Okay, so this is Marion Correctional Institution. This is the primary of 3 institutions where I've been teaching over the last decade. And it's very difficult to get photos inside for a variety of reasons, but I want to share that I have the permission of the individuals in these photos and the institution. I found that the best way to get photos is if you can convince the institution where you're teaching that it's in their interest to share about the good work that's happening inside. So now I'm going to cycle through some of these and share with you. So this is a group of our sort of long-term practitioners who've been in the program, some of them more than 5 years. About half of the individuals in this photo I've actually trained to teach and facilitate classes. We started out with more of a meditation and pranayama focus at the beginning. Then we got heavy into asana, a lot of ashtanga and vinyasa. But ultimately what we do now is a lot of chair yoga. And so many of the individuals in this photo either teach or take a chair yoga class. I found that a key to program sustainability is train the trainer, right? So empowering others to teach inside. So it's not just my voice, right? It's not just what I think is good. It's really hearing from these guys. And everybody in this photo's got a story about yoga. And if we had a lot of time, I'd share all the stories, but I'll just share a few. So the gentleman here in the middle of the photo, Yuri, his family is from the Ukraine. He has been in the program basically the entire time. He teaches a hatha class and a chair yoga class now. And at the height of the pandemic, Marion Correctional was setting records in the United States for staph infection, in terms of the staff who works there being infected at 75%, and the residents also being infected above 80%. So Yuri's cellmate was diagnosed with COVID-19, but there was no room in the medical ward. The prison had shut down all extraneous programs, and his cellmate was having difficulty breathing in the middle of the night, even stopping to breathe. Yuri loves pranayama, he loves breath work, and so he made it his task to stay up all night, every night with his cellmate for over a week, and basically wake him up when his breath would stop and breathe with him. And that's a story from inside that I just really want to celebrate. Another story is a gentleman on the left here. He's the one in side angle pose, Phil. He actually wrote this up in a narrative that I'd love to share with the group at some point. It's a little too long for this presentation, but when Phil got started in yoga, he was on 2 crutches and had been told he would soon be in a wheelchair due to complications from diabetes and an Achilles tendon injury. He walked past a yoga room where guys were doing back bends, standing poses, vigorous sun salutations. This was before we had a chair yoga program. He popped his head in and said, "Hey, what's going on in here?" And he said, "Do you have some literature for me about how yoga can help?" And I said, "We're fresh out of literature, but here, have a seat in this chair and let's do some stuff," which wasn't really true. We had books, but I didn't want to just give him a handout, right? And Phil and I together designed a chair yoga curriculum that got his shoulder mobility back, strengthened his legs, and his doctors and his roommates couldn't believe it, but before long, Phil was down to just a cane and then walking on his own. I've got another photo of Phil I want to get to here. Here's Phil after his journey. He now teaches several classes and he teaches meditation in the recovery services group that he facilitates. Just super proud of Phil. So as you can see, all these photos are pre-pandemic. And once the institution was hit that hard, they shut down all outsiders coming in, including myself, and groups couldn't meet any higher than groups of 6 in most classrooms. But because almost all of these gentlemen teach some aspect of yoga, they were teaching their friends, they were teaching small groups. And so what the Teaching for Equity program allowed me to do was to teach virtually to the extent that the institution would allow, and to send in a lot of resources, curriculum, sequences, and just remind these men of their inner strength, their power, their vitality, even as the pandemic was just totally disrupting institutional life. So if I have one thing to share today, it's that Chi-Town here, Yuri, Phil, Sam, many of these men continue to teach inside, and we're even teaching when COVID was at its worst. And so I was teaching virtually, getting them together, having them brainstorm and process that experience, and giving them resources and tools to go out into the world and keep teaching in the prison environment. So that's a little bit about the work inside. I think I'm coming in close to time here. So I think if the last thing I would want to share is just that this funding was really necessary for me because the state of Ohio, which has been funding this program, right? I started as a volunteer, but then was able to secure funding, they pulled that funding at the beginning of the pandemic and have said they're not interested in renewing it. And so I've, of course, been thrust into a job search, but the Teaching for Equity funding allowed me to continue to show up for these men at this institution and 2 others in Ohio in a way that would not have been possible without the funding. So thank you to Yoga Alliance. Thank you to the Teaching for Equity community. And thanks for listening to me today.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Adam. And you guys, I in the chat, I also put Adam's information if you want to keep the conversation going with him. And we'll be sharing more on the site as well. And so if you start to pose questions, please keep the questions and comments going on the chat. They're being copied on a Word document, and we will circle back at the end once these wonderful people have concluded their presentations.
So Francisco, just to clarify, we are going to take Tara's question now since it's fresh related. So we'll do those brief questions after and then have time for general combo at the end.
Tara, do you want to read your question, or I think it would be nice for you to read it.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Nice to see all of you. And thank you, Adam, for sharing this amazing experience that you had. So my question was, what inspired you to persevere even when it felt odd in the beginning? And how did you translate your experiences into encouraging the people you work with to push through their blocks to practicing?
Great question. Yeah, and let me just I'll improvise with it. I feel like I could go on about this for some time. And so, I mean, at the time that I started this work, right, I myself was in financial distress. I had a job that I was leaving and losing money to go into this space. But I just really believe that mass incarceration is wrong. It's a poison in our society. It destroys lives and it destroys communities. And I felt like if there is any way I can be a resource to these men who are living in these conditions, if there's any way that I can create an alternative space within prison that's not prison, I'm committed to do that. So even though I had to drive all over Ohio and go through security and get stuck in the chapel for 5 hours because of lockdowns and all kinds of crazy stuff like that, it was worth it because I found that everyone's soul was so hungry for development, right? Not development by me, but self-development. So I see myself as a facilitator who can just bring content, I can bring resources, I can bring practices, and each person's going to come to their own thing. So I think the development and the overcoming people's blocks to practice is a lot about listening, right? When I started this work, I was more like, I have these practices, I have this content that I need to get out into the world. But very quickly it was, I just need to listen to these men and hear about their back pain and hear about their diabetes and hear about their families. And we will design the practice that they need. And ultimately, once I started the teacher training, they will lead it, right? They will say, not just, Adam, we need chair yoga, but they will say, I will be a chair yoga facilitator and I am going to lead these groups of my peers to practice. So, I mean, there's been a lot of obstacles along the way. People fade in and out of yoga, right? It's not that everybody was consistent with it the whole time, but I felt that my job was to show up, to keep listening, and to keep providing as much as I could, both in holding space and in bringing in the practices that people were requesting and also the ones that worked for me. I think there are a lot of lessons along the way in that listening. But maybe the most important one would be that no two people will ever learn the same way. And maybe we all already know that just as teachers, but just really emphasizing that personalization of practice is the absolute key here. A one-size-fits-all approach will not get anyone very far in these spaces. I hope that answers your question. I hope I got it.
I think that's great. And I think it's just to add to that, is that I think it's important to remember that this is also what you just said, Adam, is the foundation of yoga, that, you know, the kind of teaching yoga in a class setting, like as a template where everyone does the same thing, is a relatively recent development, you know, and oftentimes historically people would go to a yoga practitioner and get kind of a subscription for their specific needs. And I think that's beautiful that your students were, and that you're carrying that tradition on, because to me, that's a really important and intimate part of the efficacy of this healing form. Yeah. Thank you. I think we can move on. Anything on your side, Francisco? With Adam, or we move on to Ivelisse?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot. I'd rather wait till we circle back at the end. I definitely want to talk more about the funding of Adam's program, like so many questions too. But yeah, let's keep flowing, fam.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Ivelisse Castillo, welcome. The platform's yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to Salim, Francisco, Christina, and Yoga Alliance for hosting and having us here, for supporting us in our mission, and to my peers as well and other fellow yogis. My name is Ivelisse Castillo, and say my stage name or yogi name is Ivelisse Namaste. I identify as she, her, they, and Afro-Latinx. I come from New York City. I moved around a lot when I was younger, but primarily from Brooklyn. And lastly, in the Bronx, I just relocated to New Jersey. And I just want to share a little bit of information on my why before I tell you a little bit more about what I'm doing now and how Teaching for Equity has supported me. So when I was younger, I grew up in Brooklyn with a single mother who was a victim to domestic violence. And it was not an easy environment to be around, you know, constantly on the edge and feeling as though, you know, I was in fear. I actually developed anxiety, and I didn't even know that's what it was. I was so young, but I just felt this natural urge to want to breathe, to practice pranayama. So at like 11 years old, I was in my room breathing, practicing, and realizing that it was helping me. And then a little later, maybe when I was a teen, I started to suffer from back pain. And my doctor was the one that recommended, like, hey, you should try some yoga to help you out. So I started going to yoga classes, and I'll never forget my first yoga class. I was about 17, and I just cried in Shavasana. And I felt such a release. And I think for me, I realized that along with poetry, yoga and meditation were forms of therapy for me. And they really helped me with letting go of certain traumas that I had to witness and experience as a kid. In addition to living in an environment where there was a lot of poverty and economic struggles. So on that note, that's what's inspired me to become who I am today. I am currently a special education teacher in the Bronx for elementary school students. I'm also a Reiki healer, meditation and yoga instructor. I teach mostly Hatha and Vinyasa. And my goal is to just inspire others and make my healing practices accessible to all, especially those that are at risk or that have special needs, or that have resistance towards these practices that will allow them to heal. And anyone that takes my class, I would say, would share that I help people feel grounded, I help them feel safe, and I create a Zen environment. I'm quoting that from one of my students. But most importantly, I want others to really become advocates for themselves and understand that these are healing practices that will help them and assist them in life and continue to allow them to grow and unfold. So one of the other things I just want to share is that I published a book titled Nelumbo, which means lotus flower. And a part of that was because during my journey, or through my journey, I realized the significance behind the lotus flower, which is that it comes from muddy waters and it blooms into a beautiful flower, and it represents purity. And I really felt like that, or feel that that represents who I am and the experiences that I've had in life. So because of those experiences, when I became a yoga instructor, I thought that it was very important for me to teach and serve communities in need where yoga is not as accessible. And the Bronx was one of those places. I started off working at Sweetwater Dance and Yoga, just providing community classes, primarily donation-based. In addition to that, because I had just published my book Nelumbo, I started to create these yoga classes where we would flow through yoga, and I would provide different poetry and different mantras throughout the flow. And I feel that it really helped others have an emotional connection and release during the flows. And then another thing I was able to do with the opportunity that my principal gave me was start a yoga club in my school for children about ages 7 to 11, primarily children with special needs. Because I could see in them some of the experiences that I had as a child, and I could see that they really needed these tools. I was able to provide an after school program to my students, and it was absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, the pandemic hit, and when the pandemic hit, I had to start teaching virtually, which sort of cut off the yoga club. In addition to that, it stopped my opportunity of working in person with my students, which for me is very important because we create a safe environment for our children. In addition, I also couldn't work in the studio, so I had to, be willing to teach virtually. And I was feeling really called to support the BIPOC community. So I started just on my own outside of the studio, offering meditation and yoga through social media to the public and Reiki healing circles. And from that, I saw the opportunity for Teaching for Equity. And I thought that would be a great way to help support me and also help support others that I knew were interested, but they felt that either they didn't have the finances or they just had certain resistance towards practicing. And I felt that by them knowing that I received this support and they're supported, they'd be willing to practice. And with the Teaching for Equity opportunity, which I'm so grateful for, I was able to create teaching series, yoga series. I offered 4-week series for the general public, primarily the BIPOC community or those supporting the BIPOC community. I also created a 4-week series for my children and my students in the schools. And I was also able to provide in-person yoga at Central Park and a one-day yoga retreat. The one-day yoga retreat, all proceeds went towards an organization called Out of There so that they could allow others to go hiking and practice different yoga and meditation experiences for free. And in the event that they don't have the finances or if they don't have transportation, they also provide shuttle buses to these, beautiful locations outside of New York City. And another thing that I started to work on during the pandemic, and at the same time that I got this opportunity for Teaching for Equity, is working with Urban Health Incorporated with adolescents. And it's a program for health and wellness, particularly pregnancy prevention. And I've been working with them virtually. So some of the challenges that I personally have experienced in general is just resistance in wanting to be dedicated and practicing and showing up. Resistance for my students in particular, feeling uncomfortable in their space because they either don't have space, they don't have yoga mats, or they're just not physically comfortable for movement. So I've had to alter our yoga practices to chair yoga. And also incorporating pranayama just to get their bodies ready and get them grounded. And the other thing is just accessibility to communities in need. Because we can't really be in the buildings, we can't really go in person. Now I don't have as much access to my students and the studios. Now that things are opening up, but during the pandemic, also, lastly, I want to share that I volunteered and worked for Exhale to Inhale, which is a shelter for women and children that are victims of domestic violence or sexual assault. And that was really important for me, especially with my background, with my childhood, and giving back to the community and bringing social justice. And just making my mother proud, to be honest. So I'm going to start sharing some images for everyone. And just to give you an idea of some of the things I did before and after the pandemic. Can everyone see my screen? Yeah, okay, awesome. So this is just, for me, a representation of me rising from muddy waters. And it's just a little quote from my book. Humble hearts grow in the mud and rise above to form a bud unfolding into lotus love. This is an illustration that I did. Here's an image of my students I have permission from all of their parents as well for photography and sharing. This were some of my students from the yoga club. And then these are some students that I created a poetry and yoga workshop for them at the studio. These are my students as well at the yoga club. And they helped me. And what we did, we had a little fundraiser to provide these donations to a shelter for women and children that are victims of domestic violence. These are just pictures of some classes from the studio I worked at. This was the flow through yoga. They got a copy of my book. And then here are some just dedicated students, I want to say, or yogis that always show up. She became a yoga instructor. This young lady is working towards becoming a Reiki master. So, I hope to think that I had a part to doing of that. And then this young lady here as well, I've had her under my wing and teaching her about different herbs and flowers and how they can be sacred medicine. These are just some flowers. Unfortunately, I couldn't take pictures of the kids. It's really hard to take pictures when you're working virtually. So Peace is Power was the online 4-week series I offered to the general public. And then the yoga club for my students. And I also provided a teacher appreciation workshop for high school teachers. There's just a little quote from one of the young ladies that attends my class all the time. I've been taking classes with Ivelisse for the past year and I absolutely love it. Her energy is gentle and soothing and you leave her class always feeling energized in body as well as spirit. I love the creativeness she brings to her practice. Yogatong, which is a yoga class I made up. It's a flow to the rhythm of reggaeton beats, as well as her patience and ability to make you feel comfortable and welcomed. She has been a huge part of my growth, not only as a yogi, but as a person. I'm grateful for the safe, no judgment space that she creates. This is just another field trip that I was able to provide for free at Central Park with the help of Teaching for Equity. Some more images from that. It was a really beautiful, beautiful experience. And it also challenged us to tune out the noise that was around us and really tune into the present moment.
Ivelisse, quick question for you. Where were the kids from and had they spent time in Central Park?
Well, the Central Park event, these are actually, there was one kid that actually came, or 2 kids, but the rest are primarily young women, adults, just the general public. I just invited people and they just showed up. I did have help promoting from Out of There, which is an organization that I work with now. What they do is they provide different activities outdoors and they helped me promote this for free. So, the classes were for free.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then this is the 1-day yoga retreat. Everyone is welcome fundraiser in which the proceeds went towards the organization to help others experience these type of retreats for free. I also was able to provide a trauma-informed workshop through the Yoga Alliance with the help of Teaching for Equity. So I'm so grateful for that experience. It was really beautiful, inspiring, and I hope to do more. And then I just wanted to share, if there's time, this really quick video of my students that I'm serving now, the teens that I had mentioned from the Bronx. I have permission to share this as well. And this is the group that I was sharing. There is some resistance because of space. They don't have yoga mats, and I'm currently working on, I just applied for a grant to help them and see if hopefully we can get some funding so that in the fall, I can continue my work with them of providing meditation, yoga, and poetry workshops. So in this video, we kind of worked on poetry and mantras.
Hi, I'm Larissa from Club Tia, and these are my affirmations. I am strong, I am worthy, I am the architect of my life. I build the foundation and choose the content. My name is Nikane, and I am a peer educator at Club Tia. Here are my affirmations. I am strong, I am worth it, I am capable. I I am independent. I am a daughter and I am a sister. I am loving, respectful, and caring.
Hey guys, my name is Glennis and I'm a peer educator at Club Tea, and today I'm here to share my affirmations with you. Affirmations is a practice of thinking positive, self-empowerment, and boosting your self-esteem. My affirmations are: I am useful, I am consistent, and I have a purpose.
I am lovable just as I am. I am perfectly imperfect. My needs are important. I am a strong and powerful person. I can handle whatever comes my way. And people love and accept me just as I am.
Hi, my name is Faith and I'm a peer educator at Club Tea, and these are my 3 affirmations. I am patient, I am peaceful, I am passionate.
I am brave. I am deserving of happiness. I am loving. I am understanding. I am forgiving. I am strong, yet I am peaceful. I am resilient, yet I am gentle. I am filled with unconditional love. I am, we are one. Namaste. That's it. I'm going to stop sharing there. Thank you, everyone, for your time and for listening to the work that I do. And I find joy in serving others. And thank you to Teaching for Equity as well.
Beautiful, Ivelisse. Thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. And it's great to hear from your students as well. Video component was fantastic. I think we can keep it moving, Francisco, and then open it up at the end, because I think there's some really great things that probably folks would like to talk about. Yeah?
Without a doubt. I mean, one thing that's kind of naturally been a part of the sanghas that we've been leading is just having organic dialogues at the end of the presentation. And yeah, let's keep it flowing. Thank you so much, Ivelisse, and yeah, thank you for the work you're doing, girl, and keeping it flowing. Gary, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. Thank you, Francesco. I want to thank Christina and the Yoga Alliance Foundation and Salim and Francesco. One of the great things that came out of this was I didn't feel alone, which is pretty tough working in some of this stuff. And just to say it right up front, the grant was empowering and affirming for overall, because some of this work is pretty tough, and it really helped with perseverance. And I'll get into that a little bit into my story. But my background, I was called Buffalo as an inner city pastor in the East Side, and I've since retired from that to work on what I'm doing now full time. I was introduced to yoga to improve my flexibility and mobility. Old story. My yoga instructor had a dream to bring essentially the essence of the Africa Yoga Project to the East Side. And since I was already an integral part of the East Side, we began a collaboration, and the rest is history. And I'm going to share that story, where it started and where it's come to now. So this should share here.
Gary, we can see it perfectly.
Is it sharing now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so the east side of Buffalo is a big part of the Rust Belt. You can see what the industry looks like there now. So huge lack of living wage jobs, lack of services and resources. These are all factories that were 24/7, people making a living wage and raising their families. But in spite of all that, the people are they're resilient, they're resourceful, they're survivors. They work with each other to repair their houses, to work on their families and their neighborhoods, to do what they can. Simple things like rebuilding porches so that neighbors, you can see all these front porches, neighbors connect with each other, even building some newer houses. And so within this community, there's also a large South Sudanese refugee population. And I connected also with them, and in terms of recovery, things like putting gardens in empty lots. But the real key for me began when I began to connect with mentors who basically welcomed me in, and they began to teach me and connect me with the neighborhood, how to learn to listen, to understand, rather than promote my own personal opinions. They were essential for helping to build relationships of trust and respect in the Sudanese community and in the local community that had changed hugely in the last 60 years on the East Side. One of the things we learned was that PTSD is not only ubiquitous in the refugee community, but also within the residents of the East Side of Buffalo. And so this is when I got my trauma healing training. Here's a group from our class, mostly South Sudanese, also learning as peer counselors. And we began to put this work together with other ways of working with the people in the city from a trauma point of view. I had the opportunity to go to South Sudan and to see firsthand where folks were from in the midst of war. Here we're literally, there's still fighting going on in another part of the country in my first few trips. And this is the sort of neighborhoods that the refugees are coming from and leaving their own home culture behind. But there's still families that when we listen, we began to make connections, and things like movement and healthy movement translate across cultures, even if you can't speak the same language. And then we come around all the way full circle with kids here in the US who weren't even born in basically their home country, but again, beginning to make a connection. Now, one of the challenges we found in the South Sudanese population was that there's health issues, obesity, sedentary lifestyle, from diet changes. And so the in for the movement with yoga began, like with so many people, with a healthy movement, with an exercise sort of thing. And our community partners, the local yoga studio, the first one we worked with here, we basically began doing yoga with the kids and the families. It was well received. The kids were having a great time. And in this time period, I began to get my own formal yoga training. I'd been practicing for a while myself in a couple of studios. And eventually it came along that I got my 500-hour training, yin, chair, and touch training certification. And one of the coolest outcomes is one day in one of our programs, we had someone from the Buffalo Public Schools come down to see what we were doing. And she made a comment on the incredible self-regulation of the children. A couple of my advisors weren't surprised because they've been involved in the yoga in classrooms movement across the country. But to hear people say, I'm seeing these children already having steps to a better life just by doing stuff like this, stuff like having fun together in a borrowed church or auditorium or in a borrowed community center, even developing leaderships. They would take turns leading a class. Even the youngest amongst them would become empowered to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Bringing folks together, we have to have a group program picture, right? Academic outcomes up in the kids. The children are turning things into play. And Sudanese youth even figured out how to turn yoga into dance. And they really began to take ownership of this program. So we moved this on also, including youth football, ages 6 to the mid-teens. Here we are, we're just trying to move it out of into mountain and into a forward fold, and the foolish instructor didn't realize kids with shoulder pads can't get their arms up over their head, but they did their best. The children's parents and the coaches were remarking on the increase in focus, both in the game and at home with the kids. And they just started it to be more flexible and maybe prevent injuries. Here we are, the coach is beginning to take over, leading it. You see their best effort at Sphinx there. These kids are ages 4 to 6. And what the kids began to figure out is they could actually gamify yoga practice. So they would have, I would call them friendly competitions of who can hold chair the longest, or eagle the longest, or chaturanga, and really began to sense that this was their yoga on their terms. By this time, I'd realized that there was a lot of physicality to yoga that was really helpful, but I wanted to explore deeper what were the results of things that come out of trauma, anxiety, fear, living in a sense of violence. And so I began studying traditional Chinese medicine. I became certified as a medical Qigong practitioner. I teach Qigong in a variety of forms, and Tai Chi, and incorporate a lot of that into what I do with Yin Yoga practice. And as of now, I'm actually part of a teaching team for yoga instructor students for 200-hour Yin Yoga and Yoga Therapies certification programs. So all this comes together, and this is where it really begins to intersect with the Yoga Alliance funding. I'd started working at Buffalo City Mission initially in the men's program. They were skeptical of yoga. They'd had, I guess, some not so good experiences, but my background and some of the people who vouched for me said, let's give this a try. And basically we bring the trauma healing, the yoga, the traditional Chinese medicine, all together in the City Mission's programming. And it's really come to fruition in now what they call their Dream Transitional Program, a pathway to a stable life with the opportunity to build a better tomorrow. They're not just into housing the homeless, but how can they help individuals become self-sufficient and able to tend and take care of themselves when they've been through whatever they've been through. I came in originally as a health and well-being program, and they quickly realized that it really helped folks in terms of their attitude and their focus as they're working through things like housing, financial literacy, substance abuse recovery, and a whole variety of the spectrum of what we need to be able to live our life to the fullest. And so in the men's program, we started in the old building. There was a basement room that always smelled of something that reminded me of an 80-year-old locker room. And for the men, their first take on buying into it was from the physical aspect. They love the Hatha yoga. They really buy into the yoga nidra and pranayama, and then ultimately yin yoga, they begin to adapt into. And in all of these cases, often we have to adapt to chair yoga. The men have been from, they're in reentry programs, in drug recovery programs, they've been homeless, many have been victims of violence and lost everything while they were in the hospital. And now we're in the new building, which you see a shot of here. We have our own room on the 4th floor with glorious windows looking out across into the countryside, and it's become an important part of the men's program at the Buffalo City Mission. So a couple of testimonials. CM was a refugee. He came to Buffalo, ended up homeless, ended up at the City Mission after fleeing a country that was at war. I asked him one day, why do you come? He just said, I feel more relaxed and better able to focus. Wow. JD had been a victim of violence and had been badly beaten. And when we started, he was wearing a back brace and was prone to muscle spasms. About 6 months in, he stopped wearing his back brace completely and is pretty much immune to the spasms now. I asked him, he's one of my longest students, not only has it changed my life, it's helped my family too. My son does the yoga exercises with me and I see the positive effects on him. I have more room to give love and more room to receive love. Wow, those are the sort of things that motivate me. I got invited to work at the women's facility. See, a nice big sign here. So I'm a guy doing programming in a women's homeless shelter where the women have been homeless, reentry programs, recovery programs, victims of violence and domestic violence. And with the women, the in is more on the emotional side, right from the get-go. They love the yin yoga. We do chair adaptations for some of them because of mobility. They love yoga nidra and pranayama. Many of them I've trained when I couldn't be there. They were doing it on their own, and they like the hatha yoga, and they buy into that pretty heavily also. So Cornerstone Women, they're asked, what was the best part of the class? Finding my balance. I think it's very beneficial. A class like this was offered. It was enlightening and thoughtful, very, very relaxing. Their first impact responses. And then they were asked, and this is by leadership at the facility, what change do you want to make in your life as a result? Incorporating mindfulness, stretching and exercise more in my life than I already do. Try to slow down, relax more on my own, working on not letting anything upset me with everyday life. And meditation as a part of recovery. I got directly from leadership at Cornerstone, and it was so heartwarming. So in preparation for this presentation today, I went to the person in charge of the whole DREAM program, and I said, well, you got me here doing this. What is the most significant part? Why do you all want me here? And she simply answered, the folks are being present in the present, right from the top. So we're continuing on this. Here's the difference that the grant made. It was incredibly helpful for perseverance at the time. When COVID hit, there was an easy way to just kind of dive out, but we worked on doing online teaching because both facilities thought it was an essential program. And it was a reminder that the folks outside of my own little echo chamber thought that this had value. And then I got COVID myself, and I was literally completely out of commission for 2 weeks before my recovery began. And when I finally got back to teaching in person, at this point, we had managed to figure out social distancing to teach in person. It was the only program going on in person. The first thing that some of the women said when I came back in was, you're always asking us how we're doing. How are you doing? It touched my heart. And in the midst of one of the tougher times of slugging through this, I got a phone call from someone I'd worked with in the past who said, I just want to let you know my HIV test came back negative, meaning he had no viral load in his body at all. When he first began working with me, he was non-compliant with his meds. He was in full raging outbreak and was really having a very tough time. And from that, this stuff has made a difference in his life and so many other lives. So that's where I'm at today.
Beautiful presentation, Gary. Thanks so much for sharing. These stories are super compelling. I think I'll put forward a couple of things that came up in the chat for you, Gary. This is from your fellow panelist, Adam. Shall I read it, Adam? Just the integration of TCM. He says, I find Qigong movement and internal circulation to be so useful. The men at the prisons are very interested in it as well. I'd love to hear more about your incorporation of TCM. And I think this was also echoed by our friend Tara, who's in Kenya, is also a acupuncturist and TCM practitioner.
I can give you one very good example. When I was leading a small practice in the original men's unit, and JD was there. And as he was having a massive spasm and going down, he was flashing blue aura, which is related to kidney. And we got him down to the ground. And we had talked in the past about working on his anger, which connects to liver and TCM. And I said, is there something you're afraid of? And he broke down and he said, I'm angry because I'm afraid that all of this is going to happen all over again, and I'm never going to be able to change my life and be accepted for who I want to be. We use the TCM with some of his specific practice to work on letting go of the fear in his kidneys and the anger in his liver. And so from the Negon water tradition of letting go and using dissolving meditation to let go of the old stuff has been a powerful cue.
Amazing.
Thank you, Gary. There's also a question way back to when we started with Adam's presentation that Casey shared. We weren't able to address it, but Casey was asking, is your training, Adam, 200 RYT or a scaled down version in terms of hours?
It's a great question. Thanks for circling back to that, Francisco. And thanks for the question, Casey. The answer is it's actually more than 200 hours, but it is not a Yoga Alliance, like I'm not a Yoga Alliance certified school. So we call it yoga facilitator training or even wellness facilitator training because it's geared towards yoga, but there's a lot of content about breath work and meditation as well. And everybody sort of chooses their own path. The asana portion focuses on traditional sequences. I myself come from Ashtanga and a bit of an Iyengar background. So we work a lot with that kind of what Salim highlighted earlier, which I really appreciate, which is like that kind of traditional approach of coming up with a prescription for each student. I'm trying to give the more asana focused yogis who want to teach some of the techniques of working with traditional sequences and what the therapeutic benefits of those are. But we also have a very, very heavy yoga philosophy, yoga lifestyle, and then also inclusivity and consent driven portion of the curriculum. So really what it is I developed this by the seat of my pants, right? I'm a 500-hour certified instructor, and these men really wanted to teach. And so for me, it was like, all right, they're going to end up teaching their buddies on the yard. They're going to end up teaching their friends in the gym. People are going to come to them with back pain. That was already happening. And so what I did was just to devise modules that they could move through. Some required for all, and then some more specific to different people's interests across everything from like Sanskrit and ancient Indian logic and mathematics to anatomy and kind of like looking at how to be a good teacher and a good facilitator. So what does it mean to include everyone? What does it mean to maybe come in with a lesson plan, but be ready to throw it out the window 5 minutes in when you see who's in front of you, right? So that's how I devised that curriculum. But it was unclear to me. I think one of the reasons that I never applied to make this a Yoga Alliance certified school was that the yoga studio I was partnering with raised concerns that incarcerated men be carried all the way to having a 200 or more, having never taught in public. In other words, outside of the prison. And so, looking back on that decision, because I basically asked for like, hey, should we make this a standard YTT? And they were like, well, we have these reservations. And I was just kind of like, well, I'm going to train them anyway, so I guess we'll do it this way. But clearly, I would say at least 5 or 6 of the participants who fully completed every single module that I offered are probably teaching above a 200-hour level, at least in my opinion, and based on the curriculum that they've received and completed.
Yeah,
I hope
good.
that answers the question.
Casey, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I noticed that Adam, Evelise, and Gary all mentioned the importance of empowering leaders in the community. And that's really where my heart and mind are now, is I've got a 200 RYT curriculum. And now I'm kind of wondering, is the next step going to be identifying those who want to do the Yoga Alliance registration, or also having other types of trainings as well for people who may not be interested in that path. So I'm really interested to hear about those different paths, and that makes perfect sense what Adam was explaining.
I'd be happy to dialogue on that further if you want to reach out to me via email, and I'm sure other folks here have some thoughts, but I think having that kind of open-minded approach to what do people need, what do people want to learn is useful. Thanks for the question.
I could add to that just a little bit. Our football coaches, every one of them who's interested, can lead all their kids in a full sun salutation. They have no interest in a Yoga Alliance certification or any of those letters. They want their kids to be safe and healthy. They've been very attentive, and they understand at a very deep level everything that goes on to the whole flow of a sun salutation and the adjustments and the alignment. And that's what they need in their community, and that's what they want, so that's what they have.
Yeah, Adam, just honoring your perseverance, my brother. You're like, okay, great, we're gonna keep going with this.
Yeah.
So really appreciate that. And just on another note, if that ever comes up, that some of these men, are coming out of that facility and going into a profession and wish to go into a profession of it, I feel that Yoga Alliance would always be open to that dialogue, especially if you show them all the content that you went through with them.
Thanks, brother. Yeah, and the solution so far has been to help them both financially and otherwise to get enrolled in a 200 as soon as they get out, if they want that. And we've had, I think, 4 people at this time go through and graduate a TT right after their release. But reentry is a really fraught time.
Yeah.
A really challenging time. And so I think maybe only one of those 4 actually teaches any classes at present, right? But yeah, thank you, Francisco.
Yeah, no sweat. And I want to kind of ask you one more question, Adam, before we keep flowing. Regarding your funding, you mentioned that earlier, so I just want to know like where you were at with that. I know that unfortunately, the prisons in Ohio have the funding was cut, you mentioned. So I'd like to hear where you're at with that, and if you want to share anything.
Yeah, thanks for asking. These programs have been tremendously successful, and the only reason they're continuing is because of that decision to offer training so that the men inside can continue teaching. Because, as congregate settings, prisons have really, really clamped down and been hit really, really hard by the pandemic. People that I know at Marion Correctional passed away last year in the middle of that. Thankfully, none of my students, but staff and residents both passed away. And in all of that, the funding for just about any extraneous program, of which mine is included, was cut, and the state is very wary, I guess, about including this kind of programming in their budget items, I guess for the rest of the pandemic or forever. I don't know. The question came up earlier about resistance, right? And although I found the population very open, I found that different administrators and security staff have very different opinions of what we do, even openly mocking it or trying to create barriers to it happening. I almost got kicked out of the institution for turning the lights off in Shavasana. So, you know, even in a space that was still lit by natural light. But yeah, so it's without funding. However, there are a variety of things that could happen with funding. So, for example, right now I'm trying to expand and get some additional teachers in Ohio who are committed to this vision of adaptive prescriptive yoga behind bars in dialogue with the residents and training the residents as you go. So future funding will be applied toward creating more of those opportunities. And I think there are prisons who would have it. I also myself am now looking to see if I can find a position, maybe in some larger yoga organization or some place where I can basically support the growth of yoga behind bars from a place where I'm not coming from just like being funded for a couple months at a time. So that's what I'm seeking right now. Thanks for asking, Francisco.
Yeah, my pleasure. Man, I feel like just, you know, I'm getting a little fueled, like just so much work to go to, you know, just educate people, you know, and going into that specific space that you went into, Adam. I can only imagine the different kind of pushback that you had. So thank you, my brother. Ivelisse, you started to expand on a question in the chat. Do you want to share a little bit of what you were sharing there, like through your voice?
Oh yeah, sure. So I was just going to add on to what Adam and Gary were saying. So from my experience, although I don't directly, offer a curriculum and train teachers directly, I have offered classes for Exhale to Inhale, which is a nonprofit organization for women and children that are victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. But they are affiliated with the Yoga Alliance. And then Sweetwater Dancing Yoga in the Bronx, the studio I worked for and that I also received my training from, they are affiliated with Yoga Alliance as well. But one thing I did want to share is that I've shared with other healers and other yogis that I collaborate with through out of there about teaching for equity so that they could hopefully, put their work into applying for the grant or being a part of this movement. So I think that's also important to share the work that Teaching for Equity is doing and the space that they're providing for all of us.
Thank you for that, Ivelisse. Yeah. And to that note, we won't get into it now, certainly before we close, but we will have 4 more of these sanghas with different presenters, all with amazing stories as well. So just a heads up on that. I actually can put the dates in the chat. I think that's a good way to do it. Yeah, I'd love to hear if there's anyone else who joined us today who has any questions, comments, feedback, inspirations that came out of the discourse, or any specific questions for any of the presenters. Now's a great time. And if not, that's okay.
Hello, everyone. Wonderful presentation. I've really enjoyed hearing everyone's practice and how they've been able to take their teaching to various communities. I'm dialing in from Washington, D.C., and also being an ex-athlete and working in the yoga field of teaching and working with special needs population. It's been really inspiring to hear everyone's story. How has it been for you all in reference to hiring staff during this time of pandemics, of getting the help as you start to expand your practices to all these different communities? And of course, we would love to do it all for ourselves. How has it been with just getting the word out of saying, hey, if you're interested, the help or people wanting to volunteer their services and wanting to be a part of your affiliations of the work that you've been doing? And Gary, I can start with you, Gary, because I'm being an ex-athlete, recruiting coaches or other trainers to really want to include yoga into, injury preventions and concussion protocols and a lot of those things, getting the help and support in that. How has that been in spreading that message?
Well, I've done a few things when I've been working with coaches. When we were first introducing this to the football coaches, um, I just had them stand in chair with me, and they're looking at this middle-aged guy who doesn't look like a jock, and they're all sort of crying tears of blood. And then I showed them a short video. There's a woman down in Florida named Dana Santaz, who's a yoga instructor who works with a lot of professional athletes and is credited as the mobility coach for some of the giants in both hockey and baseball. And so some of the coaches began to buy in pretty easily, and that's where it started. The other aspect was getting credibility with the kids. And so I had one of the teams is 13 and 14-year-old boys. And for some reason, I got the impression they were all a little bit full of themselves. So I just said, well, let's start together. Let's do a plank. And got them into a plank. The coaches got their butts down or their butts up, whatever was wrong. And they're all falling over, rolling and moaning as I'm still talking to them, barely getting warmed up. So they began to see some credibility. The early adapters were probably 20% of the coaches and the kids. And by the end of the first season, we were about 70 to 80% into the group. That's how it worked with the athletes and the kids.
Thank you, Gary. And what about the assistance with the special needs? How has that been working in New York with Ms. Castillo in reference to receiving the assistance and getting more people to be supportive of the special needs children?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I feel like it hasn't been easy. I've had to bring attention to it. I've had to be the advocate for my students, and not just offering these programs to all, but specifically to populations that need it the most. And, once you become an advocate or you take charge of a mission that you have, I feel like people start to hear you out. But what's most important is that the value that you have, the principles that you have, and what was so beautiful for me is being able to see the students, like I had shared with Salim and Francisco and Gary and Adam, how the students would start off, we would start off with our pranayama, and then afterwards going into the poses, some of them would have moments where they're like, I can't do this pose. And they would start crying, and we would sit down and have these conversations, and it went into life conversations, not just, conversations about why it is that we can't do this pose. And it was just so deep and so important and meaningful. Now, when I'm working virtually with them, it's still really powerful and beautiful because now they integrate it into the class. So when we're in the middle of class, they bring up yoga, they'll talk about, oh, this, that, and some of them want to lead the practice, which is amazing. I have a couple students that are like, I want to be a yogi when I grow up, and they're definitely ready for that path. They're going to continue on their own. But it is challenging to work with them virtually for two reasons, like I shared, the space and their environment, and also the yoga mats. So I was able to receive donations of yoga mats for my students in my school, not the children that I work with, not the teens and adolescents that I work with. But when pandemic hit, guess what? They didn't let me send the mats home with them because of COVID. So it's been hard to provide them with those materials. And I'm hoping for the school year that's coming, things will open up a little bit more and they'll allow me to provide these materials. But yeah, I would say that we all need to raise our voices a little bit more and speak for those who may feel like they don't have a voice or have a hard time expressing themselves, or really just need that support.
Yeah, I feel like this, even the Yoga Alliance Foundation kind of birthed at these times, this extension of Yoga Alliance, like Christina was referencing earlier. It's really opportune, because it's time for us to expand this dialogue. And like I think all of the presenters have shared today, the yoga, or as Gary said the other day in our internal dialogue, the Y word. It's there's all types of kind of judgment about what it is or could be, and there's a lot of misunderstanding around it. And like the presenters shared today, this for Gary, it was his wellness program, but it translated to assisting all the other programs and all the other dialogues that people were having. So really excited to keep this going. Thank you, Salim. Just shared the dates for the upcoming sanghas. The link that we have, it's pretty simple. It's just we don't want to make it complicated for people to join because technology is we all relate to it differently. So we've made it super simple. We have a nice pretty simple landing page, and a little button people can link. Please share it with your people. Our intention is to hold this space. Once again, I keep saying the same thing, but I'm cool with saying it, to share these wonderful stories that are inspiring, and we need this inspiration in these times. So thank you, Adam, Ivelisse, and Gary for sharing with us today. As far as time goes, how are we doing with time, Salim? How's the time check?
We're good. We have 4 minutes till past. I think that's probably a good time to transition on. We can take, if there's any other feedback from anyone, we do have a few minutes. And if not, we can wrap up. Yeah?
Yeah, and creatively, if you guys feel inspired to connect with the 3 presenters that shared today, or you can share with us and we'll link you, or their information was also shared on the chat.
Yeah.
Right now, sometimes in the moment, in inspiration, it's let it settle with you, and maybe tomorrow you're like, actually, I want to link them with my cousin who's doing this work or whatever. Beautiful things are birthed through inspiration, and community. So just let us know.
Francisco, I was just wondering if I could speak real quick to one of Dante's questions, which
Please.
was about like recruitment and expanding the organizations or the work that each of us are doing. And I'm sure that many people on this call are doing. And I just want to say that it's really challenging. And I don't want to sound like a gatekeeper or elitist in saying this, but this kind of work is not for every yoga teacher. And 200-hour or more doesn't guarantee that someone's ready to step into this kind of space. There are trainings out there that I think are useful for getting some of the language and some of the techniques, but to me, there is nothing that replaces apprenticeship. Looking back, if instead of just creating this from scratch, if I could have shadowed someone, it probably would have saved me years of struggling and making mistakes.
Yeah.
And so I have done what I can to bring some teachers into what I do, who have all learned a lot. Unfortunately, none of them have seen teaching behind bars as their dharma, which I just have to accept, right? That they learned something from that interaction. But that, that may not be for everyone. And in fact, it shouldn't be, right? And so I think when we talk about expanding, maybe part of what it is that all of us who are passionate and doing this have a responsibility to pass on what we know to other interested teachers, and also for us to try to recognize when those skills and those potentials are present in a teacher. Because I've had people come to me who want to teach inside, who I've had to say, I'm not sure that you're ready for this, or I've brought them in and they've had a really negative reaction to the intensity of the space, whether it's the antagonism of the guards or the intensity of the classroom space or the unpredictability of the environment, right? There's a lot that's just nothing like a yoga studio. And so just really putting it out there into the world, like if you're doing this work or you're interested, if you're doing this work, take on apprentices. If you want to do this work, find somebody to shadow. That's what I would say.
Great advice, Adam. Really, really great.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah. And Dante is just a context, is someone who's specifically works with people with special needs, with yoga, wellness, and brothers in arms. Krista, is there a question, something to say? I see a hand up. Or it could have been a mistaken emoji. Krista?
I think it's
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Yes. Welcome.
Okay, great. Sorry. Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you, Francisco, and everyone else here. I wanted to just share also that, Adam, I agree completely. Everybody finding their own path and finding a mentor is so, so important. I teach in the recovery community with persons with addictions. And when I teach in the center, in a recovery center, it's so different. People walk in having smoked a cigarette, having their Red Bull in one hand, 2 cups of coffee, and halfway through yoga, they leave to smoke another cigarette, and it's totally normal, absolutely normal. And if a traditional, I want to say a traditional 200-hour yogi that comes out of a training would just be blown away about having, it's just absurd. And it's just so delightful to work with all these different populations because it's a blessing. But yeah, you see all, and your heart has to find its own path. Because you have some students or some teachers that, once the class starts, they lock the door and you can't come whirling in late to throw your mat down. So holding space for everyone is just beautiful. Thank you, everyone.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing. I'm just going to put in the chat right now a great yoga institute, which you may be familiar with, some of the folks on this chat, Naroga Institute. Just for people who may be interested working with, I've worked with them. I worked with incarcerated youth in Alameda County in California and went through some really great training with them for recovering addicts, incarcerated youth, and incarcerated men and women, and also people recovering or dealing with chronic illnesses as well. And that's really their specialty as well. They're also definitely Yoga Alliance certified. So you can check them out for resources or give them a call if anyone's interested in that particular. Are you familiar with them, Adam?
Yes, but I haven't done their training,
Okay.
But I've heard about the good work. Yeah.
Yeah. This is really, really beautiful. I'm so glad to be back in Sangha. I'm just realizing how much I've missed it. And I'm seeing as I'm speaking that Gary has something to share. So you can unmute and the platform's yours.
I just want to underscore what Adam was saying. The only reason why I can do what I'm doing was by connecting with communities. And that happened by being mentored by folks within the community who made the introduction and taught me, as Clifford Geertz would say, the deep local knowledge. Because what someone from outside sees through our outsider eyes is not necessarily what's always happening. And that's so important for developing what I call cultural competency of being able to function in an environment that might not be one's usual environment. And it can be kind of frightening, but if someone is being mentored and they really need to be there, you can work through that, but it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
It takes years to be ready for that.
Yeah.
So just say it again, encouraging people, if you're doing something, you're feeling connected, be on the lookout for where are you going to find an apprentice to mentor or someone that you can help along the way and help up.
Thank you, Gary. Was the term you used deep internal knowledge?
Deep local knowledge.
Deep local knowledge. I love that. I really love that. I feel like that's really a crucial skill for any, not necessarily to have it, but the sensitivity to where people might be coming from, which can get lost in the yoga studio at times. That there's kind of this homogeneous experience where people are just supposed to come in and you're supposed to know what you're doing, but not always being sensitive to where different people might be coming from in terms of their experience entering that space.
Absolutely. And that happens with time to overcome suspicions that you don't even know are there. I mean, you saw some of my pictures there. I don't look very Sudanese, but they consider me one of their own.
Oh, come on, don't be modest.
I have honorary citizenship in South Sudan. It didn't happen in a day or a month or even a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're like
Adam, you probably see the same thing working inside. The guys are sizing you up.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I always feel, I mean, for example, this is just one tiny example, but I took a trauma responsive teacher training as part of my 500 hour. And this training was particularly geared towards women who may be victims of sexual abuse, was developed partially in recovery centers and women's prisons. And I learned a lot, and in fact, started implementing consent cards for adjustments from that training. That was one of the biggest changes. But there were things of certain best practices that were suggested in that training that I just knew that the men I was working with would not at all respond to those portions of the curriculum. Like there was a lot of kind of like volitional language, which I think can be used right, but it took me a couple of years to figure out how to get it. But like, if you want to raise your arms, raise your arms. My guys would just be like, all right, bye. Like, you know, they want that energy and that fire from me and from the incarcerated facilitators. And so it was just interesting. I guess what I'm saying is if you dip into a training, still keep your critical lens on of, hey, is this going to work for the people I'm with? And if not, then I'd encourage you to, how can I adapt it? How can I find a way to apply it? Yeah.
Can I add on to that, Adam? I like so agree with that. And I love something you said earlier when you said about developing a sequence or a curriculum and then walking into the room and being willing to throw it out. Like I've experienced that so many times. I also did the trauma-informed training through Exhale to Inhale for women in shelters. And it's been really helpful with language, but I totally get where you're coming from because it really depends on the group you're working with and the person you're working with. And it's really important to be mindful, to be aware, to keep an eye on your students, to support them in seeing, first of all, you know, is this language working? Are these poses working? Do I need to modify? And it doesn't matter which population you're working with, kids, children, teens, everyone. I think we just need to be more aware and mindful for each other.
Thank you, Elise. Thank you, guys. I feel like, you know, at first I was thinking, you know, I feel like, you know, we're redefining yoga or what it is, you know, and I feel we're just kind of expanding it from this like narrow perspective of what everyone thinks it should be, and we're educating one another, you know, to have a more expansive conversation. You know, I was just messaging Salim. I was like, we need to invite this crew to present when we lead our teacher training. You know, I feel like the more voices and reflections are heard, the more of a powerful teacher is nurtured. You know, yeah, back to that local knowledge too, and sharing these stories. You know, I feel like you know, what yoga is or is supposed to be has been kind of elaborated in our culture as this or that. So I really feel that that's really a skewed perspective. So thank you for sharing your stories today. And I look forward to I'm going to stop the recording if you guys feel good with that. How are you guys doing with that? Cool.